Hey y'all, welcome to the Clock Tower. I'm Colton here with Brandon. The grand final of the Weiss Schwarz Invitationals took place on Friday night, and we're here to talk about it. A lot to talk about in this game. Matt is your Weiss Schwarz Invitationals champion, taking the first series 2-1 over Ryan, playing Fate, and winning over KonoSuba. Brandon, take us through what happened.
Absolutely. Game one, Matt ate everything. He had 3 turns that game. Ryan started, and on Ryan's 4th turn, he closed out the game. Matt didn't get enough resources to be able to try to stabilize. He just didn't cancel, and Ryan got everything going his way. Ryan takes game one. Game two, probably the most normal game. Back and forth, pretty even what's going on. Ryan gets up to 2-6, stays there, tries to just maintain, pushes Matt up. Matt then turns around, pushes Ryan up. Ryan then tries to come in to close out the game. Matt cancels. Matt finishes Ryan off. It very back and forth, very close game. Matt's compression helped Matt to kind of finish out that game. He did a double stock swap with the event, so he was able to flush Ryan's stock twice and refresh his deck, and then took advantage of the deck state from there. Ryan pushes. It's not enough damage. Pushes Matt up to 3. He comes back on the swing. He swings, trying to go in for precise damage, and he falls just short, giving Ryan an opportunity to come back.
He swung into 3-5 for 2, and it got canceled. And then he doesn't trigger on his final swing, which only does 1 damage. Ultimately, it doesn't end up mattering because Ryan's unable to close, and he ends up scooping after he doesn't finish that turn. Interesting line of play, doesn't end up changing the outcome, but at the very least, something interesting to think about.
Going into game 3, started off again very similarly regarding that it was kind of more back and forth. Ryan able to get triple Yun. Matt's able to get Sakura level 1s on field. So kind of going back and forth with that. Get up to level 2. Again, very similar story. About 2-6. Ryan holds off, pushes Matt up. Ryan then brings out the Fumio. Fumio's goes in. Matt cancels twice. And Ryan has an opportunity to burn for 5. Chooses not to. And then the turn after does do the burn for 5. Damage is still canceled. And Matt's able to finish Ryan off on the backswing.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. First, game 1, you brought up when we were talking about it afterward how very similar this was to when Christian and Cameron played in the ReZero Mirror match back at World. This is one of those things that can happen to any deck in this game, right? Because everyone starts off with bad compression off the top, and there aren't a lot of ways to compress yourself down very well in your first deck. So you can just eat damage a couple turns in a row, find yourself a level behind, and then that's just kind of it. And that's really what happened here. You know, Fate has really good compression tools, really good mill tools, but you got to get through that first deck. And KonoSuba was able to stick a lot of damage in that first deck.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like KonoSuba's swinging for a lot of damage compared to other decks early in the game. It's just that's the right combination of triggers swinging into, that first always poorly compressed deck. If you draw a couple of climaxes and don't have the cancels in deck, then that was not something that occurred because of this matchup. That's just kind of how it goes with the first deck sometimes, I guess, if that makes sense.
One of the things that we had talked about earlier was that in one of our previous videos, and was probably one of the keys to success for Ryan, was to be able to push damage early, getting as much damage as he could into the first deck of Fate.
Fate doesn't have a lot of natural stock gen aside from just attacking. Pushing Fate early does prevent Fate from being able to do a lot in the early part of its end game, once it gets into level 2. And it also doesn't have any early plays. It's a little bit harder for Fate to recover from an early push just because it doesn't have the tools to generate the resources it needs to actually get anything down and to start claiming board and doing damage in return.
Well, it also helps that Fate's end game, essentially, with the rider is very expensive. I mean, rider's 2 stock, and then the cost of each rider is an additional 2 stock. So, you're looking at a significant stock just for getting the cards on field and then using their effects to their highest potential. Ryan is able to stick a lot early, and Matt wasn't able to recover from just the sheer amount of damage. He tried to stabilize by getting some of his level 1 pieces in to try to get some of that stock generation going, but he just continued to eat damage. He took almost a level and a half in the second turn, and then another level damage in the third turn.
Game 2, rather different.
Oh, absolutely. I think one of the biggest plays here was Matt's double stock swap.
Mm-hmm.
Keep in mind, that's off an event, and you can't really search out events with Fate's deck. He had both of them in hand and was able to then use them effectively to get that extra refresh point of damage and change the deck all at once for his opponent. Because Fate's really good about taking advantage of deck state and controlling the deck state of both it and its opponent.
Mm-hmm.
Forcing that refresh for Ryan really helped to get that last bit of damage in.
Yeah, especially in a game like this where both players are compressed down the stretch. KonoSuba actually did a really good job of compressing as well. So finding ways to get any damage that you can is really important. By refreshing him as well, he doesn't give him any real way of fixing things. He doesn't give him an opportunity to pay out that stock into his next deck, really. Because he's into his next deck now. When you have to mill through 30 cards or whatever, because KonoSuba has mill pieces, but that's not what it's built to do as much. So when you're forcing someone to get through their entire deck again and get through their entire stock just to get to normal levels of compression, that's a really solid play.
And the card number was significant too. Like going into that turn, even with a one stock swap, there was a possibility that he wouldn't have been able to get all the way through the deck even. Because if Ryan was still able to cancel twice, he would have been able to stay in that deck and then force the refresh on his terms.
We saw that somewhat in Game 3, not to get ahead, but Matt was stuck with really bad compression on his turn and needed to mill through an entire deck with no compression and was able to do it. I will say this for Fate as well. The way that it manages its own board state is that it makes the Fumio and the Foreclosure event both sometimes unplayable. So the usual things that KonoSuba would do to decompress Fate, it can't do because Fate just used a refresh event, so there's nothing in waiting room, or it pays out all of its stock and then refreshes. So now there's nothing in stock or in waiting room. There was one time where KonoSuba didn't really have the Fumio or Foreclosure option, really, just because doing it wouldn't have done anything.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Like, being able to negate your opponent's cards is definitely an asset. To give your opponent dead cards in hand is very helpful.
So now it's time to talk about the main event. Game 3. Win or go home for Ryan. Matt can close it out right here. And he does in, I want to say spectacular fashion, but I don't know if spectacular is the right word.
It was a sight to behold.
So Matt was able to control the board at level 0, right? Because he got his Shiro bombs down. He was able to encore them for his next turn, even get himself up to level 1. When he's at level 1, he's looking at a board full of a front row for KonoSuba that has a Snot Aqua and a couple of the on reverse top check Megamines, right? The nuisance Megamines. And he still has 2 of the bombs down, but because he's level 1, he decides to play over one of the bombs with his level 1 combo. And I thought that was interesting because now instead of denying Ryan his level 0's ability, he not only is he giving him that ability, he's also giving him a reverse target for the Union instead of just letting the board clear with the Shiro Bomb, right? But he was very clearly concerned about eating a ton of damage as he had in Game 1. So he puts his level 1s on the field. Ryan eventually tri-fields Unions, get this combo off, starts to build those resources. I think Ryan had the advantage going into the end game, mostly because of his reach, right? Because Ryan and KonoSuba in general can do a lot of damage with very little. So Ryan gets his Unions down, starts the combo off, maintains board because Matt decides just to sack in, right? Ryan can't loop the combo necessarily because he doesn't have reverse targets, but still, massive board advantage for Ryan in the mid game. Matt looked like he was willing to concede board because he was willing to count on his compression. So Matt really leaning hard into the compression that he has because he didn't have the resources necessarily to start to win board back. So eventually Matt's sitting on 4 out of 26, right? And this is where things start to go sideways for Ryan. He's able to get the pieces that he needs to mill through. Ryan was like visibly upset that Matt kept plussing like off of the Ilya Akatskis and that he just kept getting the cards that he needed to get through so that he could get to his refresh point. Still, refreshes, and his compression isn't fantastic at this point, right? Like, he doesn't really have any board presence. By the time he gets back around to Ryan, Matt's sitting at about 7 out of 25, cancels 3 times off the top.
Yep.
Mills through the deck again, refreshes again, goes back to Ryan. Ryan is at level 3, so he hits his Fumio. He's got Matt sitting at 4 out of 30. And this is the decision, right? This is the decision that people are going to be debating and questioning for a long time when it comes to this game, this entire tournament. This is one of the things that people are going to remember. So Ryan has an opportunity to close here, right? Because he has his Explosion Magic Burn 5 on field. There aren't any clock kick targets, so he can't play the Megumin combo, but he is able to try field 2 souls and swing into open lanes with a burn 5, swinging into 2/5, 4 out of 30 compression. Matt cancels 2 off the top. 2 out of the first 3 cards are cancels. And this is the decision that's kind of been reverberating all weekend long. It's been, the topic of conversation. Ryan decides to, instead of paying the 3 and pitching the 2 to try to burn 5 into this compression, decides just to attack with the Megumin and pass turn. That attack does stick, although there wasn't a trigger, and it pushes Matt into level 3. So, Brandon.
Colton.
When we were watching this game, texting back and forth during the game, I remember being more or less incredulous, wondering why on earth wasn't he attacking? Why wasn't he pushing for 5 into such bad compression? And I've been thinking about that play for the last couple of days, right? Ryan's one of my favorite players. I love his deck building. I love his play style. But this decision off rip did not make sense to me, right? Mm-hmm. Thinking about it more over the last couple of days, I think I get it. I still don't know if I would have done the same thing. Functionally, if he burns the 5 and attacks with the Megumin, that's still not enough to close the game unless he triggers on the Megumin. And even if he does trigger on the Megumin, he's counting on no cancels in the top 9 cards, which normally wouldn't be a big thing. Like, okay, you push your opponent up to 3/6 if you don't trigger, or you push him at least into level 3 if he cancels, right?
Mm-hmm.
The issue was resources.
Yep.
Ryan didn't have the hand size to necessarily recover if it doesn't land. And Fate, having the compression tools and having some healing tools, might actually be able to put itself out of reach in the middle of level 3 somewhere, healing down to 3/4 or even 3/0, depending on what sticks and what doesn't stick. If you can't close there, you put yourself in a really tough position if you're Ryan. I'm more of the school of thought that if you have a chance to push for a game, you should try to push for a game. But that being said, I get it. And I'm not even saying I disagree with the decision. Ryan's a way better player than I am. So I'm not. So I don't want it to be taken like I disagree with this decision. I don't. I think that Ryan made the decision that made the most sense in that spot, given what he wanted to do. And I get it. I don't think it's a bad decision.
I think I actually would have been on the other side of the fence. I wouldn't have pushed there either, because of what it made Matt's deck state look like. Because at that point, Matt has 2 climaxes left in deck. He doesn't have the resources in hand because he's been bleeding hand up to this point just to try to sack against Ryan. He didn't want to have targets to be clock kicked, so he's been sacking this whole time. Cards are just dripping out of his hand. He doesn't really have a lot of resources left to be able to push further. And if you don't give him a compressed deck to be able to brainstorm, continue to mill through his deck so that he could free fresh, he's not going to be able to respond well.
So what you're saying is basically dare him to get through his deck with another free refresh so that he can be compressed enough to deal with you next turn?
That's what I would have done. Realistically, I think that's also what Ryan did as well.
Yeah.
He turned it on Matt and said, "Come at me, bro."
More or less, yeah.
It was the opportunity to be able to survive another turn as well as force Matt into making plays that he didn't want to have to spend resources on. So it was a resource flush as well as an opportunity to be able to set himself up with resources in hand, because that's what he would have lost. He would have lost basically his hand. He would have been cantripping essentially to be able to make playables if he had done the burn 5 then.
So by forcing the issue, Matt would probably be more likely to try to work for a lethal finish if he felt like he could survive another turn, which, had he been able to survive a big swing from Ryan, he would be more likely to survive that turn. Cancel or not, that big swing for 5 mills. So it gives Matt even more of an opportunity to get through that deck and to get to a better refresh point so that he can better survive. So in any case, Matt has to get through his entire deck. But if you don't swing there, it makes it harder for Matt to get through that deck but also easier for Ryan to still have resources at his disposal so that he can put together a better swing to more conclusively finish the game on his next turn.
That's my argument, yeah.
And I think it's a good argument. I think that's one that Ryan would make as well. And obviously, like he does, like because that's what he does is he passes. Yeah, as soon as it happened, I knew that we were gonna have this conversation, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
and I think as tempting as it is to swing and potentially have game there, which I still think is not a bad decision, it makes sense. It makes sense why he would hold back because if he doesn't close there, then he's in kind of a weird position.
And realistically, also the riders heal down, so like he either had to finish the game there or pass turn. Because if he couldn't
Right.
finish the game, he was just going to compress, get down, and then have a new deck, and then have no resources to be able to respond to it.
And let's say you leave him at 3-6, right? Matt's still going to be able to heal down back into the middle of level 3, and it's tough to close there. It's tough to close because then he's going to be very well compressed. He's not going to leave you clock kick targets. So you're going to be swinging into something that has a lot more compression for relatively high damage numbers. And like, do you hit one of those? Probably, maybe not. So let's get into that next turn. What happens as a result of this play? Matt is into level 3 now, but he doesn't have the resources to push for game. So he doesn't. He pushes Ryan a little bit deeper into level 3, but he has to focus his resources on refreshing, which he does. And I believe he refreshed all 8.
Yes.
So he's sitting at 8 out of 33. Ryan played the game well enough to win, and Matt's deck just didn't let him. But even with 8 out of 33 compression, 4 out of the top 10 cards being climaxes is really unusual. And I think that probability dictates that Ryan is going to win in that situation far more often than he doesn't. And I think KonoSuba had the better game in game 3. Took control of the board, did what it wanted to do for most of the game, had a lot of opportunities to swing for damage. Some of those are going to cancel, but when all of them cancel, that just means the deck got, bit in the backside by RNG. And I think more often than not, we're going to see these two play again on Saturday. And again, this isn't to take anything away from Matt, who played this game really well and did everything he could in game 3 to deal with what was more or less a bad situation. Like, KonoSuba got what it wanted, it controlled the board, and Matt couldn't do much to win board back, and then had to play around KonoSuba's endgame, which he did really effectively, forcing Ryan to take bigger swings and giving him more of a chance at cancels. So not trying to take anything away from Matt there. I think that in most situations, for sure, Ryan wins game 3.
It was definitely a hard-fought victory for Matt and Ryan. Like, to get to that point, it was well played, it was well executed, and they did their best at controlling the RNG as much as possible to get to that point.
I don't think either of them made any real mistakes. And I'm sure that the two of them would probably disagree with that to a certain extent. Like, as an observer, to me, it looked like two players who were very good, playing very good decks, nigh on perfectly. And that was a joy to watch. And I want more of this tournament so that we can see more of these games.
So we're looking forward to the next one when that comes around. Are very thankful that it was able to happen and take place.
Yeah, props to Ian and the rest. Thanks for putting this together, y'all. It was really an awesome tournament, and we look forward to the second iteration. In the meantime, we still got more stuff forthcoming. Brandon's got his slime profile, which will debut on Tuesday. We will have gameplay for that on Thursday. And then the week after that, we will have another Clock Talk, followed by more gameplay. We're going to get back into our rotation. Every other Tuesday is a new deck profile. Every other Tuesday, a new Clock Talk. Gameplay every Thursday. So be sure to join us for those going forward. Tuesday, again, Brandon's slime profile. Check that out. And I can attest from the fact that I've had to play against this list way too many times that it is a good list. So be sure to check that out. Join us again on Tuesday and Thursday next week and every week going forward. Thanks again for joining us all tournament long. It's been a good time. Let's do this again. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And until then, have a good one.
We'll see you next time.